kids. Today we are in the hot and semi-hot desert climate zone of Hawaii. More specifically though, we are in the Ecology Dry Forest Preserve. And today we will be talking about some of the endemic species that are able to grow in this ecosystem. Behind me is the Willy Willy tree. And Willy Willy translates to twisty twisty. And the reason for that is because how the seed pod twists open to release the seed, as you can see right there. Now, the Willy Willy, unlike many of the trees native here to Hawaii, is a deciduous tree. And unlike many deciduous trees around the globe, the Willy Willy loses its leaves during the hot summertime. Whereas most places around the world, they are used to seeing the leaves fall during the winter and fall seasons. Now, during that period of hot summer when it has no leaves, it still needs a way to photosynthesize. And the way it does that is through the bark. Now, as you can see, we have some pigmentations on the bark, some yellow, some red right here, or orange. Now, the photosynthesizing process occurs through the yellow portion of the bark. But during those hot summer times, it still gets way too much sun, so the orange pigmentation acts as a natural sunblock to make sure it doesn't get too much. Now, some of the purposes the Hawaiians would use this tree for, like many trees, is the wood itself. Now, as you can see with this log I have in my hand, you can notice it doesn't look very heavy whatsoever. And that's because when you dry it out, it's not a very dense wood whatsoever. And it's actually quite buoyant. Now, some of the ways you would use this is for surfboards. Some of the earliest surfboards made by the Hawaiians were made out of this wood right here, as well as the ama, or the stabilizing piece on the side of the Hawaiian outrigger or fishing canoe. Another way the seeds were used were for their color. As you can see, the seed has a very beautiful orange reddish pigmentation to it. Now, you're all probably familiar with leis here in Hawaii. Those flowery necklaces you receive upon arriving or in the luau. Now, the flowers were not the only thing the leis were made out of. Hawaiians would use beautiful seeds, sometimes bird feathers, to also make leis. Now, a traditional Hawaiian proverb that is associated with the Willy Willy is Puaka Willy Willy Nanahu Kamanu, which translates to, when the Willy Willy blooms, the tiger sharks are biting. Now, there's no direct correlation between the sharks and the Willy Willy blooming, of course. It just so happens that during this time, it is pupping season with the sharks when the Willy Willy is in bloom, so they are a little bit more aggressive in the waters. Now that we've covered how unique the Willy Willy is, let's talk about how scarce it is. Over the past 200 years, these trees have been declining in number significantly, and that is due to the introduction of ungulates, such as goats, sheep, and more importantly, cattle. And another factor that contributed to the destruction of this forest that you would have seen here is the Iliahi trade, or the destructive Hawaiian sandalwood trade. Now that we have initiatives like the Waikolo Dry Forest Initiative, we hope to see over the next few generations this forest come back to life. Hey kids, so we talked about a few of the endemic species of Hawaii, but we haven't talked about any of the introduced species, all right, that kind of negatively affect the landscape and ecosystem. For example, right in front of me, you'll see this grass, and that is completely covered throughout most of the videos that you'll see throughout these lessons. As we pan out here, you can see that it's completely covered the landscape, all right? Now, this grass itself is Egyptian fountain grass, and it really thrives in these hot desert microclimates. This was introduced here to Hawaii in the 1930s to a specific ranch on Holalai, which is a volcano over Kona. Now, this grass was brought in originally as an ornamental grass, just something pretty on the property to look at, just like some of you may have in your front yard. Now, when this was brought in, they were very conscious about Hawaii's delicate or fragile ecosystem, we'll say. And they were concerned with it spreading all over the island, so they monitored it, and it was spreading over the property quite quickly, so they decided to handle this grass before it got out of hand. And how they did that is they decided to set it aflame, have a controlled burn. And unfortunately, what they didn't know about these species is that when you set it aflame, its seed spores go airborne, and then it's spread across the island like wildfire through the wind. That's how this species propagates, all right? Another species that we have here on the island that was introduced is the Kiawe right here. Now, it has a Hawaiian name, but it's not native to the island. Europeans introduced this into the early 1800s to help break down the lava rock here at the coastline. It really thrives in this microclimate, but it did make its way into local cuisine, we'll say. It's part of the mesquite family, so a lot of locals will smoke the pork now with this wood to bring out the very specific smoky flavor that you may see in other regions.